So the very last of the ancient civilizations are Greece and Rome, but they're not built on river valleys like the other ones were, and they're also considered the classics of this time period. So early Greece was dominated by the Mycenaeans, who were the first to be considered Greek because they spoke something that was very similar to Greek, and they're characterized a lot by warfare to show the power of the king, and they conquered a lot of other places and got in fights pretty often. Greek society is centered on a polis, or a city-state, which is the most basic political unit in Greece. Travel in Greece is really difficult, and so each polis kind of stuck to itself and formed its own type of government, laws, and customs. So each polis is built around a high area called an acropolis, which you can see in the picture here, that house the temples for the gods and were spaces for different ceremonies, and they're surrounded by the agora, which was a marketplace, shops, and houses and other buildings, as you can see in the picture on the left. So the ancient Greeks believed in hundreds and hundreds of gods and goddesses that governed different parts of life. There were 12 in particular that they thought were the most influential, leading with Zeus and the other gods and goddesses, and lived together on Mount Olympus. They're imperfect, they're unpredictable, but they also help to explain why the world was the way it was. Each polis pretty much claimed one particular god or goddess as their primary protector. And every year, different athletes from various city-states met at Olympia to compete against each other as a way to honor the gods. Two of the main cities in Greece was Sparta and Athens. Sparta was one of the mightiest in Greece, and they grew over time by conquering neighboring cities. They depended heavily on its army and actually trained young boys to be in the army from about 10 years old all the way up to 20 when they became soldiers. Decisions in Sparta is made by a council, which is kind of like an aristocracy or an oligarchy. Athens, however, developed the world's first democracy. It was a form of government specifically run by the people. They had also had an aristocracy previously, but then they started forming a direct democracy out of tensions between farmers and aristocrats. In Athenian democracy, though only men could run for a political office, free Athenians could take part in the government, but women were not allowed at all. Athenian democracy consisted of three main bodies: the assembly, the council of 500, and a court system, which created a system of checks and balances to keep the power equal. The Greeks were mainly known for a lot of their achievements. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are some of the major Greek philosophers who thought a lot about truth, how to govern, logic, and reason, and they'll end up coming back later in world history. The Greeks were also famous for their theater, the epics, the Iliad, for example, and the Odyssey, dramas, tragedies, and so they were very artistic people. Architecture was also a really big deal. They used a lot of columns and tried to show their power through buildings and temples. The most famous of these is the Parthenon, and they ended up building a lot of their buildings out of marble. Art was also pretty big in Greece, and we know that because of the main pottery that were used with the black figures on orange clay. And they tried to show people in very lifelike poses, trying to show the grace and power of people. Alexander the Great was one of the greatest Greeks of all time. He came toward the end of the Greek Empire. He started to expand the empire through force, and he actually ended up controlling all of Greece, Persia, Phoenicia, Egypt, and based on how massive his kingdom was, he was actually able to spread Greek culture through his warfare and his expansion. And this kind of became known as Hellenistic culture because all of the different places that he had conquered came together to form Hellenistic culture, and it was very particular to Alexander the Great's kingdom. So the Romans were able to throw out their king, and they established a republic. So Rome was based on a republic, which is kind of a form of a democracy, in which elected officials are the ones that are making the decisions. So in the early days, there was a few aristocratic families. They were the ones that had pretty much taken power over the plebeians, or the common people. And so they started to create more of a law system to kind of create this checks and balances and make society a little bit more equal. So the patricians and the plebeians worked together to create a constitution that broke the government into three parts. So this is very similar to the Athenians. They broke them into the Senate, the Assembly, and then the magistrates, who were kind of the judges in the court system, which also created this checks and balances system. So Rome's empire was not going to be anywhere near successful without its powerful military. The Roman Empire is one of the most famous empires of this time period. As you can see in the picture on the right, they were able to expand from Rome through all the way up to Britain, and then all the way also to the Middle East and Mesopotamia. They treated their enemies with a lot of justice. They had them pay taxes. They gave them full citizenship, which made people more likely to listen to the Romans. And they ended up reuniting their entire kingdom through a system of roads, which helped with trade, cultural diffusion, all of that. So in Rome, though, tensions arise in the government, actually in the city of Rome. Julius Caesar, which we all know is one of the most famous leaders of all time, he started to dominate Roman politics with two other people in the first triumvirate, which was a group of 3 people with equal power. After the death of one of them, Caesar started to force the Senate to make him the dictator, but they kind of want to keep the features of the republic, but making him the absolute ruler. So then a group of senators was like, you're going to make yourself king, you're going to establish as a tyrannical government. And so this kind of plunged Rome into a new civil war, and they ended up killing Caesar. So then a second triumvirate grew, which was led by Mark Antony, Octavian, and Marcus. And a civil war additionally broke out. Octavian defeated Antony and his ally, Queen Cleopatra, that's where she comes in, helped him to rule over Rome. And so Octavian took the title of Augustus, or the Exalted One, and he exercised absolute power to create a stable government that Rome had previously been missing under the triumvirates. During his reign, Rome entered a period of peace and also a period of expansion where trade was flowing, ideas were flowing. Rome was doing pretty well, and they called this period the Pax Romana. In Imperial Rome, the social classes enjoyed a lot of public entertainment. Circuses were held for the common people to help them to, be happy with the government. The government put these on as, we've done this for you. And so these are the gladiator fights that most of us are familiar with. The Romans absorbed a lot of the ideas from the Greek, talking about their mythology, their gods, literature, philosophy, science. But the one area that the Romans really excelled was in engineering. They were able to build roads, bridges, harbors, aqueducts, these massive temples as a part of their engineering over time. One of the most famous Roman philosophers is Ptolemy, and he's going to come back a whole heck of a lot. He asserts that the Earth is the center of the universe, not the sun. And this is the major accepted Western view for over 1,500 years. Because this is the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe and that everything else revolves around us. Rome is also famous for Latin, which is the basis of all of the languages that in Western Hemisphere that we have today. French, Spanish, Italian, Russian, all of those started with Latin. Also in Rome, Christianity started to emerge. So Rome pretty much was polytheistic. They followed along with the Greek gods, but Christianity started to emerge when they conquered Judea, where most of the Jews lived. And they had allowed the Jews to keep their religion. And when a Jew named Jesus was born, Christianity started to evolve based on the life of Jesus Christ. What we know about Jesus is written in the Bible, which is considered the holy book of Christians. At the age of 30, Jesus started preaching, and he recruited 12 different followers that he called disciples. And he preached that there was one God, and he was the incarnation of that God, and there was also the Holy Spirit. And so his followers accepted the 10 Commandments, that was the basis of Judaism, and he called himself the Son of God. However, there was a lot of Jews that didn't like this because they believed that God was going to come back and it wasn't going to be Jesus. And so Jesus was condemned to be crucified by the Romans because they thought that he might disrupt the government power. But after his death, the disciples started to spread Christianity throughout the world. So at the very end of Rome, the Pax Romana had ended. People started to get a little upset about the different governments and whatnot. Constantine took the throne, and he tried to continue the reforms that had been happening under Augustus. He granted religious tolerance, which encouraged the growth of Christianity specifically throughout the Roman Empire. He also built a new capital, Constantinople, in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which had been, which was no longer in Rome or even near Italy. And so Rome started facing a lot of attacks that essentially had just gotten too big. And so they weren't able to defend themselves as well as they had before with the Roman army. So the Germanic people started invading in the north, kind of around Germany. The Huns, led by Attila, started attacking the west. And led to the fall of the Western Empire. The Roman Empire still existed in the eastern portion, but it became known as the Byzantine Empire. Thank you for joining me, and you've now finished Unit 1.